Hi everyone, this is Sumit K. Welcome back to another video on Amazon MSK. So in my last video, we have talked about the basic of Apache MSK cluster by AWS. We have deployed the MSK cluster, we have deployed the client machine, and then we have tested by producing some data and consuming the data, and everything was working as expected. Now we are moving one step further, and we are now integrating more services with the Apache MSK cluster. So if you look at this particular design, the overall process is going to be same, but now I'm integrating a couple of more services. So again, we have a client machine wherein user is going to SSH into this client machine, and the user is now sending the data, and we will deploy a brand new MSK cluster. And what happened that whenever Apache MSK cluster receive any message or data, it will send the data to the S3 bucket, right? Now, S3 bucket serves as the destination that receives the data from the connector. So you are seeing the connector here. So the role of the connector here is to pull the data from the MSK cluster and send it to S3 bucket using the VPC endpoint. So we are also using the VPC endpoint. So the data flow should be within the AWS network. It should not go over to the public internet, right? So basically, an MSK cluster to which you will send the data, then connector will read the data from this cluster and send it to the destination S3 bucket. This time there are two types of connector. Basically, there are custom. Basically, these are the custom connector. There are sync connector, and I think there is a push connector, right? So sync connector is basically pull the data. It pulls the data from the MSK cluster and send it to the destination. Where in the push connector, the cluster itself or the service itself push the data to the connector, and then it send it to the destinations, right? And we will also attach some IAM role to this connector, so that this connector has all the permissions and access to write the data to the S3 bucket, right? And VPC endpoints make it possible to send the data from the Amazon VPC that has the cluster and the connector to Amazon S3 bucket, right? Now, um, you must be wondering about this part connector, and this is actually playing a very crucial role when we design a complex architecture, when we use when we use the data streaming data, larger streaming data from the many source, right? So you can think about connector is basically integrates your external system and AWS or sorry, the AWS service with the Apache Kafka by continuously copying streaming data from a data source into your Apache Kafka cluster, or continuously copying data from your cluster to your data sync, right? In this design, the source is your Apache MSK cluster, and your destination is your S3 bucket. So we call it a data sync, right? So a connector is basically or can also perform a lightweight logic such as transformation or format conversion or filtering data before delivering it to the destination. So what does this mean? Let's say you have a heavy amount of data is coming, let's say in the JSON format or in any other format. Let's say it's coming in the XML format, right? And you want to do some logic here before you want to send it to S3 bucket. Let's say your data contains 1, 2, 3, but you only want to send 1 and 2 to your S3 bucket, not the 3. So only the data which is required for your destination, you can put your logic here, right? And it will filter your data, and it will apply the logic. It can also convert the format, let's say from XML to JSON, or JSON to XML, or the whatever format that you want to change. All the logic will be done by connector, and connector itself has a lot of um, you know worker process are running behind the scene. Auto scaling and everything happens, and there is a concept called plugins. So I'll talk about plugins is not here in the picture. I'll show you in the demo, right? So so here, the source connector, this is basically a source connector, pull the data from the data source and push this data to the sorry, I'm talking wrong here. When we use the source connector, it pull the data from the data source and push the data into the cluster, right? While we are using the sync connector here, which the sync connector is totally reverse. It actually pull the data from the cluster and push this data to the data sync, right? So we need to understand the difference between is sync connector and the pull connector, right? So um, this could be a use case for many of the companies wherein they want to distribute, or they want to store the data coming to the Apache cluster to somewhere else, right? Okay, uh, so let's start with the demo. We will create I have already deployed an Amazon MSK cluster in Singapore region, and I already have a client machine which is already running state, and then a couple of resources I already have S3 buckets, VPC endpoints, and I'll show you right how to deploy the other things. Most of the things are already deployed. I just want to give you a full end-to-end you know um, end-to-end of data flow, right? If you haven't watched my previous video, then I would recommend that you watch my previous video so that you will have a basic understanding of how to create the cluster, what is the client machine here, right? So you will have some basic understanding and some of the commands that we have already executed, so you will get to know that. Okay, and additionally you can also refer AWS documentations to refer those commands. Okay, so without wasting a time, let's jump onto my console. And the first thing I'm going to do is let's go for the MSK. So if you see here, I have already a MSK cluster, MKC tutorial cluster with this name. And this is a custom cluster. In my previous video, we have deployed the quick create cluster. So, and this is the version, and this is the broker size. So in order for you to deploy, just create on the create cluster. And here you need to choose the custom create. Put your cluster name, you can put anything, and click on the provision one. Leave it default. Leave it default. If you want to just change the size so that you won't get much charge, so you can go with this small. And here the number of zones, threes are recommended, and you can go with that option number 2. And leave it default. Let's make it 100 GB and go to next. And here you need to choose your VPC. I'm going to go with the default VPC. You can choose your 3 zone. I'm choosing my 3 subnets in each zone. And here this is the default security group. You need to choose that. Click on next. And here you must check this unauthenticated access. This is must. If you won't do that, then maybe your client machine might not be able to access this cluster, right? And once you click on next, you simply go and deploy your cluster once, and then you can review it. Make sure that you note down all these things, subnets and security group, because you would need it later. Okay, it's pretty simple. So I'm going to cancel it because I already have my cluster running. And if you see here, if I click on the view client information, this is my 3 broker nodes or nodes. In the plain text, it's in TLS, and this is in the IAM form. So I'm going to go with the plain text. So I already copied this in my so I have already copied this one. This is my you know endpoint information, so it's already there. Okay, now um, the second thing is I also need my client machine. Before that, let's create a S3. So let's come here. So I'm going to delete this one, or just don't delete this one, or leave it as it is. So let me Okay, leave it. So this is my actually this is my S3 bucket. Actually, why I was saying deleting, because I was already testing it. This is my folder where all my messages will be printed or will be stored. So leave it as it is. I will leave it as it is. So I just want that you need to understand the logic. Okay. So this is my bucket name, MKC tutorial cluster Baba. I will put it here. Right. This is my bucket name. And the second thing is there is a role that I have created. The role as so so this your cluster is there, your S3 bucket is there, and now let's go for the EC2 instance first. I'll come back to role later on. Let's just cancel it. I'm here in EC2. So this is my EC2 client machine. It's a normal machine, nothing fancy. But one thing that I want to mention here, that again, in my last video, I have added the role to the client, but this time I'm not adding any roles, right? You can't see any roles here. The only thing that the security group must be passed or must be allowed in all traffic to your MSK cluster, right? So what does this means? If you go to the MSK cluster here, and if you go to the properties, there is a security group, right? If you just click on the security group, so you need to add the inbound rule. This is the inbound rule, wherein I'm saying that allow all the traffic from this particular security group, means the EC2 instance specific security group. This is the one, right? So that my EC2 instance, my client machine, can talk to the MSK cluster, can interact to my MSK cluster. So you need to allow some inbound rules on MSK cluster security group. So this is what I have done, right? Okay, so I already did this, so I need to cancel this. And the second thing that you need to understand is, so our client machine is done, cluster is done, security groups and all this traffic is done, S3 bucket is done. Now the fourth thing is IAM role for my S3 bucket. Okay, now my IAM role, let me show you. So I have created an IAM rule here. Where is that? MSK. Have I deleted it or? Yeah, it's MKS, sorry. So I have created a role with the name MKS S3 role. You can name whatever you want to. And this role is basically for S3 role. So you make sure that it will be from S3. And there is a policy called, the policy is nothing. Basically, I'm saying that you should allow, so that your connector can have certain action, like should be able to list all my bucket, and should be able to list, get the bucket location, delete the bucket, and all those things. It can also put the object, get the object. So basically, this is the policy for your, um, for this bucket name. This is a resource, right? And the trusted relationship here, I'm saying Kafka connect, at amazon.com. So this is the assume role, right? Because if you look at here, this role is needed for this connector when we set up the connector, right? So this role is needed, and that's why we have created this role with this policy, so that my connector has all these roles, and my connector can assume these roles to talk to the S3 bucket, right? To perform some action, right? Because when the data will be pulled by connector, it has to write to somewhere, right? To the data sync. So it should have all the permissions. I hope you understand. Huh? Now, um, now your what is left here? Your connector is left. Your VPC endpoint is left, right? Let's first complete the VPC endpoint. Let me show you the VPC endpoint. If you go to the VPC, and here you have endpoint. I have created a one endpoint here for S3, and if you look at it here, like, can I delete? Okay, no. Okay, so this is the endpoint. This is the gateway one, not the interface one. It's a very simple one. If you see here, this is the endpoint. This is the VPC ID, the route table of these three subnets in my Singapore region, and this is the default policy. So you must create this endpoint. Even if you don't create it, things will go over to the internet, right? So we have to change this accordingly. Okay. Now your VPC endpoint is also covered. Now coming to this part, connector, which is the main lead here, because connector in a real world, you will use connector, right, in most of your production project. Because I said connector is something that integrate your external system, AWS service system, right? Maybe you want to connect your big, maybe what's called different database, right? Redshift, or maybe Amazon RDS, or DynamoDB, and so connectors are required. But before you connect, deploy your connector, you need to have a certain plugins. Now, let me show you the what is plugins. So again, go back to MSK. Okay, so here you have two options, connectors and custom plugins. Now, first of all, you need a custom plugin. I already have this custom plugins, and the plugins, basically, what is the role of the plugins for the connectors? So the plugin is an AWS resource that contains the code that defines your connector logic, right? So I was talking about the logic, right? Whatever logic that you want to perform has to be done within the plugins, right? So to get the logic, you upload a jar file or a zip file that contains one or more jar files to an S3 bucket and specify the location of the bucket when you create the plugins, right? Because when you create the connector, you specify that particular plugins for that you want MSK Connect to use it, right? I know things are going on your head, but it's when you practice it, it's easy, right? So how do you basically download the plugins? There is a link. I'm show you. This is the link wherein you just click on the S3 connector, and there are different type of Amazon S3 connector, self-hosted, Confluent Platform, and Confluent Cloud. So you should download this one. And this self-hosted is the Amazon S3 Sync connector is available as a self-hosted connector, right? So you click on the download, and I have already downloaded it. And now what you do, um, once you have downloaded this on your machine, so I'll show you here. I have downloaded it on my machine. So now the first thing is here, you create a custom plugin. Now, when you create a custom plugin, it will ask you where is your plugin jar files are stored, right? So it says that an Apache Kafka Connects plugin is a set of jar files containing the implementation of one or more connector, transform, or converters, right? And Amazon MSK will install the plugin on the worker of the Connect cluster where the connector is running, right? So these plugins are basically installed on the MSK nodes, right? On the MSK node, so that MSK or your Kafka cluster, managed Kafka cluster will understand where to connect. So you simply click on the browse S3, and this is my cluster. This is my S3 bucket name, and this is my um, you know the jar file which I have already uploaded in my S3. Let me show you here. Right. So once you download this plugin, you need to upload it into any of the buckets. Not necessary that you always choose the data sync. I have already uploaded here, right? So this is my jar file, and this particular folder is tutorial folder is basically where your data is getting stored, right? When the Apache Kafka cluster will produce the data, right? Okay. So if you select this, you're gonna choose this one. Just name the plugin, description, and create it, right? It's pretty easy, right? So this is what I have done, and this is the plugin name. It'll take 10 minutes to activate this plugin, and once this is done, you're gonna go back. You can go to the connector, and this is where it will okay. So basically I have already created the connector here. So how to create it? Just create a connector, and here it will ask you an Apache Kafka Connect plugins is a set. So okay, it's asking for the plugins. So you can use the existing custom plugins, or you can create the custom plugins if you have not created already. So choose this one, click on next, choose any name, demo, connector, and click on here and choose your MSK cluster. So this is what I was talking about, right? When you create a cluster, when you create a connector, it will ask you which MSK cluster that you want to connect with this particular connector, right? So you will choose your connector, and this is where you will put your configuration file. And how do you do that? In the documentation itself, this is the configuration setting, and you just need to replace your region name here. Just replace your region name here, whatever your region is. I'm in Singapore, so maybe I'll just pick it this one and put it here, and just copy this bucket name here as well. So because you need to change your bucket name as well here, and this is the topic, right? So this is the topic where it will be continuously pulling the data. So make sure these three things, reason, topic name, and your bucket name, your sync data, right? You need to um, modify it carefully. And these are the auto scale capacity. I told you that behind the scene there are many worker nodes, because pulling the data, pushing the data, it takes a lot of computations, right? So that's why it provision the data. It provision the worker clusters behind the scene and has the auto scaling, auto healing enabled. And here you need. So I was talking about this role, right? MKS3 role. So this is the role. This particular role you need to attach to this connector. So you can think about connector is a fleet of instances running behind the scene, right? So it's a managed service, so we call it connector. You won't see any EC2 instance, and this is the role. If you won't attach a role, maybe connector pull the data, and it also try to write the data, but it would not be able to do so because of the authorization error. It will fail, right? So make sure all those information are correct, and next, and then you can Okay, here, okay, it's saying you choose authentication method from the selected cluster. So right now it's you have to choose none. If you have the IAM role, you can go for the IAM role, but I'm gonna go with the none. And here the access control type. So here you should go with the TLS encrypted. You can also go with the plain text. I'm go with the default one. And if you want to enable any log, you can deliver a logs to Amazon CloudWatch, logs to Amazon S3 or Data Firehouse, right? Firehose, sorry, my bad. Next, review it and done. It's pretty easy. Cancel, I'm gonna cancel this because I already have the connector, and trust me, it's gonna take 20 minutes, at least 20, sometime more minutes, right? So you have to be a little patience. So once it is running, then only you can proceed ahead. So in my case, everything I have shown you. My machine is ready, my MSK Amazon MSK cluster is ready, connector is ready, plugin is ready, my VPC endpoint is ready, my S3 bucket is ready, my role is ready. And now think about I'm me as a user. I want to publish some data from here to Apache MSK cluster, and will receive this data, and you will see some of the data getting printed over there. So what I'm going to do, this is my tutorial folder. So if I just delete this one, because these are my old data, so I'm going to show you from the scratch. Okay, I think it's empty. Yeah, it's empty now. Okay, so let me connect to my client machine, because this is a client machine which is interacting to your um, Apache cluster, right? So here, when you are here, what you need to do again, you need to run all these commands. Let me show you. 1 second. Yeah, so again, you have to run all those commands that we have run in my previous video. You have to run your Java install. You have to download the Apache Kafka to untar it, and then you have to run this particular, IAM jar. You don't need to run this in this case, but these three commands are must. So you just copy this here, right? So this is your Amazon US MSK client information, and this is you need to run. Execute these commands on client machine, right? So once you run this here, you just need to change the version of your Apache MSK. You can get it from the AWS console and run it. Once it is done, now it's time to publish the messages. So I already have created the topic. To create the topic, how to create the topic? You can simply, yeah. So it will create the topic as well. Let me show you 1 second. Let me show you this one. This is the command, the generic command. So this particular command is used to create the topic, which is done, right? So this part is done. I think it's the same command. So okay, the same command actually. So this part is done. Now to send the data, we need to run this command, this particular command, right? So before you do that, what you need to do, you go to your, so I have already run all the commands, right? So now you have to go to your Kafka directory, bin directory, and here you have this particular file client.properties. So if you look at that client.properties, make sure this particular particular state, but particular words or data has to be there. Security.protocol is equal to plain text, right? If you don't have, you can simply create using the vi. Okay, and now we are going to produce some data. So how can we do that? Simply copy this command. All your scripts are stored under bin, so make sure you run all your commands from here. And now, so here I'm going to put some messages, right? So what I'm going to put here, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. So this is how your streaming data is coming to your Amazon MSK cluster. Since I am doing it manually, but think about that the data is coming from, in hundreds of data is coming in per seconds. You can imagine, right, how much data, how much streaming data is coming, and this data is somewhere storing in your S3 bucket, right? This is what we want to, this is what our expectation is, right? So if you go here, if you refresh, if you go to tutorial, this here, and you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How many times we have run here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 9, 2 times 9. So basically 10 times. So you can still see 10 files are stored in a JSON format, right? So if you look at one of the file here, so you will see the content. Maybe I might not able to, let me download it. Let's see what's there. And if I open this one, so if I show you here, I can see that this is number one has been printed, this particular JSON file, right? So based on that, data is coming in the JSON format. So this particular connector, you can again use your logic here. Maybe let's say I am printing, you know, I'm printing the cloud Baba, maybe some Brian file, something like that, maybe PAN card, something like that, something, anything, any information. So you can use your logic. Maybe you don't want um, you know, uh, this PAN card to be moved to the S3, or maybe you have 1, 2, 3 or something strings and numeric. You want only the numeric part to be, stored into the S3 bucket. So all these type of logics, right? You can always use your connectors and plugins, the combination of both, and use your data transformations, right? So that's it for this demo. Think about in a wider perspectives. If you are getting an information from let's say you have a IoT sensors here. So maybe you are getting IoT sensors. A lot of sensors are here. Let's imagine that you have a lot of sensors here, and here there is a service called AWS IoT. So you can connect your AWS IoT sensors to AWS IoT, and you can send the data across the services. Or maybe it can be reversed, right? Maybe your data is coming from you know IoT sensors, um, or maybe it's coming from an application to S3 bucket, and then an S3 bucket you're using the Lambda function, which basically triggering after every minutes. So whatever data that has been aggregated in 1 minute, it's pulling the data and sending it to the MSK cluster without connector. So again, it's all about business requirement and this the solution designing, which services you want to use. Again, the costing, because if I use more managed service, you'll have to pay a lot. If you use your more customized service, maybe you'll get a low less costing. So again, it's all depend on designing and the business need. All right, so that's it for today. In another video, in next video, I'm going to come up with a real world use case, um, wherein I will show you how to. There are different types of streaming data that we will see. I'll also try to show you a real use case of IoT sensors, or maybe I'll show you how the data is coming from the weather forecast application, or maybe from any traveling agencies, and how we are going to take an action live, take an action live by using the MSK cluster, and also with the map reduce or some sort of Spark engine that is used to process those data and move it into a Redshift or BigQueries, right? So stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Bye. Bye.